So you want to focus on the one side, the side that you're choosing. Okay? While you will have to consider the other side when you're coming up with your argument, the essay itself shouldn't be arguing one side. You don't want to confuse your reader at all. And then finally, of course, especially here, first person is expressly prohibited upon pain of death. I will come to your house and I will hunt you dead. You may lose points, which may lead to the same thing. So an argument, okay, tends to lend itself too readily to opinion words and phrases when you use first person. So if I'm going to start out my essay by saying, first person, marijuana should be legal in Georgia, I'm going to say, I think marijuana should be legal in Georgia. It's not as strong as the other way, is it? It doesn't sound as strong as simply saying marijuana should be legal in Georgia. It sounds like a fact. It's not. It sounds like it. It's better than I think marijuana should be, or I believe marijuana should be. Why? How many people in here are a little warm sitting here too? How many people are a little cool? How many people are comfortable? Okay. You can no more argue how you feel about something than you could argue, I think marijuana should be legal, because you could turn around legitimately and say, it should be illegal. People who are warm, people who you would say, well, no, I think it should be illegal. It doesn't make sense. How you feel is how you feel, and it's just as legitimate as how everybody else feels. That's why they're called opinions. Opinions are subjective. They belong to you. And you are 100% correct in your opinion. That doesn't mean it's correct for everybody. It is certainly correct for you. I can't argue that because I'm not in you feeling what you feel, or thinking what you think, or whatever. So we avoid that in an argument, especially. All the nonsense in the beginning where I said the first essay, hey, try not to use first person if you can, and the second essay a little stronger, right? Avoid first person. In this essay, no first person at all, period. Okay? Because it's an argument. You can't argue opinions, guys. You can, but you sound ridiculous. How do you argue opinions? You're right, I'm right. We're both right. We're all both wrong, however you want to look at it. We don't argue opinions, we argue facts. And if you present facts, you're going to make it very hard for your opponent to argue back. And that's the object. The object is the game. The object is to win. Yes, sir?
So what if you use the first person but you're still arguing facts?
How do you do that? Tell me. Give me an example. I thought that's different. Give me an example.
You just, you can...
Give me a sentence that has the first person in it that doesn't imply opinion. I'm being serious. If you can do it, you can use it. And you can't. You know why? Because you're saying it, you're starting off with the subjective. I mean, what would you say? How would you do it? And I'm asking legitimately. I don't know. How would you do it?
I don't know. You're a professor.
Yeah, right. That's why I said don't use first person. I don't think you can. I used the word think. You know why? Because I started my sentence with the word I. If you think it, it's okay. It's all good. As long as you don't try to present your opinion as a fact, unless you can argue as a fact. And remember, guys, all of this is technically arguing opinion because I'm trying to convince you of my position. I'm trying to win my argument. You could, if we were doing this long, you could present an argument back, and you'd be arguing the opposite as a fact as well. So it's all really subjective. You just don't want to give the illusion. When you use the first person or opinion words, you're giving the illusion of weakness in the argument, not you personally, in the argument. It's weaker. So 2 sentences. Marijuana should be legal in Georgia. Boom. Right? Or, I believe marijuana should be legal in Georgia, which is stronger, which sounds stronger.
It is not. It is not. I do.
Yeah, well, I mean, the stronger one is the one where I'm not using first person, I'm making it sound like it's not like it. But ultimately, it still is. If it's an argument, meaning it has two sides to it, that means that the people who are pro are just as strong about the way they think as the people who are con. So technically, it's subjective anyway. Try to make it sound. You don't want your audience to think there's a way in, so to speak. A lot of this, and if you look in the folder that has all this stuff in it, there's a lot of stuff in this folder because a lot of this is psychological. A lot of this is psyching your opponent out, making them think maybe that you know what they do, even though you probably don't. You want to make them think that because it weakens their argument. Okay? If you right away hit them and say, boom, here it is, sounds strong, sounds good, sounds like a fact, you know, right away it makes them feel like they're arguing a fact. And how do you argue a fact? It's like in the beginning we were talking, how many think that there's air in this room, right? They said there's air in here. Why? Well, because we're all breathing and we're all alive. So therefore, we deduce that there's air here. And then we move on and say, okay, that's a fact. Now let's talk about how the air makes you feel. How many are warm? How many are cold? How many are comfortable? So how the feels part is subjective, but the fact part, where the air is there, is objective. So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to argue from an objective perspective. Okay. All right. So let's look inside. So our last ones. There's the last one. You can see how chunky this folder is. Nice folder. There's a lot of stuff in here. You know, read what you have time. Because you're not going to have time to look at it all day. It's all interesting. It's all connected to what this is. Well, obviously, we don't have time to hit this from 100 angles, so pick and choose. So going back up, those are the three files. There's the assignment itself. Same business with MLA. The length is 750 to 1250. It's a little longer. It's the longest one. But you'll find as you argue that you're going to need length because you can argue. So it's a little longer. Choose an issue and a position from which to argue. Make sure that your issue has at least two sides. Come up with three pieces of support. Essentially, answer the question why. Right? So when you say marijuana should be legal in Georgia, why? Reason one, reason two, reason three. Okay. And this is the rough breakdown of how you should try to put it together. In part one, you have the hook, if you need a hook. Okay. Any background necessary. So if you're going to argue something that your audience doesn't know what you're talking about, you kind of have to tell them a little bit of background so they know just a sentence or two. We're crazy. Just enough so that they know what you're talking about. Right. Then you get into your thesis. And the thesis is what we were talking about, your issue and position and your three support points. So I'm going to show you that very quickly. Let's look at the model. Okay. This is what I was saying earlier. Look at this. If it doesn't look like this, at least physically, fix it. All right. So what I did was, and I gave it a title. The title's optional. I don't know if I ever mentioned that. You don't have to have a title. But if you do, make sure you do it right. Center, initial caps, italic, just like that. Most of your fun. So let's look, all right? Marijuana is slowly becoming legal in the United States. As of 2018, 8 states have legalized marijuana for recreational use, with another 20 legalizing it for medical use, medicinal use. Though it has been legal as a whole, illegal, as a whole, since 1937 at the federal level, each year sees new states putting to a referendum for the people to decide. Democracy in action. That's my intro, that's my background, if you will. I'm making sure that you know, if I start right out with my title, marijuana should be legal in the state of Georgia, I'm assuming too many things. Number one, I'm assuming you already know that it's illegal. You might not. You know, if you're not connected at all to the issue, I mean, I wouldn't know. Somebody told me. And that's what it's doing here, uptown. So now, going into this, you know that it's illegal, okay? And my argument is this. Notice I throw in the transition of my thesis, according. Meaning, based on what I just said, marijuana should be legal in Georgia. Okay. Why? Reason number one. It is a cash crop, earning millions of dollars in tax revenue in states where it has been legalized. Why again? Reason number two. There's also a large untapped potential for its use as an alternate medicinal treatment. Reason number three. Finally, legalizing marijuana will allow the justice system to focus more on society's violent effects, as opposed to using valuable drugs to pursue this victimless crimes. That's my thesis. It's big, it's chunky, but it's very minimal compared to the thesis in that you're getting everything you need to know as a person reading this right there. That's the idea of the thesis, right? What you're arguing, now you're going to argue. Okay. Now what are you doing? Well, now you're expanding on your support points. So my first support point is it's cash crop means $1 in tax revenue. Okay. My first part then after that is going to be furthering that by talking about why. Okay. So I've got basically two paragraphs here that talk about that. We're going for statistics. I picked Colorado because that was one of the first states. So up to here talks about that. Okay. And then I use the word next, and then I go into my second one, the alternate medicinal treatment. And I go into that. Okay. Happen to have two for that too. Here's my last one. The criminal justice system will focus on society's violent offenders. And then there's my conclusion, which is basically a restatement of my thesis. Okay. That's all it is. Why shouldn't Georgia tap into the benefits of legalization? They could earn millions of dollars in tax revenue, allow its citizens to have alternate medical treatments, and save money, and allowing the criminal justice system to focus on violent offenders. So 1, 2, 3. So it's the same as the thesis paragraph. It's just kind of divided, if you will. And then, of course, the way some. So it's a simple concept, guys. The form, when I talk about being formulaic and form and all that stuff, it's a simple form to put together. Now, that being said, you have to follow. Okay? So if you look at that document that I mentioned, form an idea, there it is. Now let's look at that. If you still remember the 5-paragraph persuasive essay, you remember this. This is where it's from. I got this from teaching high school. I just adapted it. Works out. Like I said, I replaced paragraph with part. Okay.
You know about the opposite side? The opposite side.
What?
You are against.
You're not getting into that, though. Why? Why don't you get into the opposite side?
Because we're trying to make our point.
Yeah, you're trying to make your argument as strong as you can. Right now, if you had a bigger space to work with, if this were an unlimited size essay, you could do that probably. Then you would be able to say what the opposite said and counter-argue it right there. But you don't have the room, believe it or not, even though it seems like a bigger essay. It is a bigger essay. It's not big enough for that. In fact, 750 to 1250, you're not going to have the room and space to do that. And you saw what I did. I did basically 2 or 3 paragraphs on each of my support points and it filled me up. That was without considering any, opponent's thinking. That was just much reason. Okay? And it filled up my space requirements. So you have to be between 750 and 1250 capable. Okay? That's mainly the reason why. For a paper this size and the way we're doing it, it's more efficient now too. Okay? So here's the put together. Part 1, this is the beginning stuff. Your intro, if you need it. I used it for background. I told you the situation in Georgia, in case you didn't know what it was. And then my statement of issue and position, marijuana should be legal in Georgia. Support point 1, this was the tax one. 2 was the medicinal one, and 3 was the police assets one. That's my intro pieces. Now, part 2, I will present evidence for support point 1. Okay, the tax one, right? So I'm literally copying this topic sentence for the tax one right here and making it this topic sentence. And then I'm getting the proof. Okay? This is where your secondary source will come in. Right? So I argue tax revenue. I chose Colorado. You can choose any state, whatever. It doesn't matter. At the time, that was the biggest. Okay? So I needed to figure out where to look in Colorado for that information, tax revenue. And I did some sniffing around when I found it, and that's how I got my first source. Okay. My second support point is you literally copy the second support point, one here about medicinal uses, paste in here, perfect. And then the next part is the third support point, where you're literally taking this support point 3, this sentence D up here, pasting it right here as your topic sentence for this one. Approved. Okay. There's the conclusion, restatement or rewording of paragraph 1. Never state anything new in the conclusion. The conclusion is your last chance to make your case from above. And always begin your conclusion with a transition. Conclusion. Finally. Wrapping it up. Never Google the word. Google transition words and phrases, and you'll come back with the transitions. Okay. Write your paper, get it all done, then go back and add your transitions if you change paragraphs. Okay. That's where Googling the word transition can help you. Google will show you make some nice transitions. Using good transitions, guys, as well as good verbs, make your writing go from amateurish to professional. Regardless of just by those 2 things. Transitions tell the reader a lot. They tell the reader that you understand the structure and flow of your information, right? Especially if you're using positional ones like first, second, third, or subsequently, or things like that. So they fancy up, if you will, your paper. So don't not use transitions. And then if you continue going down, you'll see some ideas. Again, these are just suggestions. You don't have to. But they can give you a little bit. You can certainly Google persuasive prompts. You don't have any ideas for arguments. Questions about this form? So it's in the document, form and ideas. It's right there in the lessons folder. So go in, look at the specs, double check, make sure you got the right idea. Okay. Pull up the model so that you can refer to it. Pull up the form so that you can write it in the form. Follow that form and you'll be good. This is not a good time to be creative. But it's not. Okay. Stick with the form. Much as it's boring, much as it stinks. All right, now. Let's talk about this concept of pathos, ethos, and logos. Okay. While it sounds like a foreign language, and it is, it's Greek, it's very important for what we're talking about here. Right? Starting with logos. This actually is the form of the word logic. Remember me saying that we want to argue this from the objective perspective, right? We don't want to use first person or the subjective. We want to keep it objective. Okay? This is the reason, because we all share logic, guys. Okay? We all share emotion as well, but our emotions, you know this from your own circle of people, our emotions are all over the board. What makes one person happy or sad makes the other person sad. What makes one person cry makes the other person mad, that kind of thing. I mean, we have boundaries such as, like, you cry, that kind of thing. Some people don't. Some people have never cried in their life. Some people cry at commercials. We all have emotions, but they all vary. In general, they're kind of the same. Humor, right? Love, jealousy, those kind of things. They're all, in general, the same. But I guess our expression of them is different. Okay. Whereas with this part, the logic, the logos, this is the part that we share that makes us the apex predators. Okay. Think about it. We're the apex predators. Pathos. Derive this from pathetic, which is related to emotion. Those are the two big ones, pathos and logos. Have both of those in spades. We're full of pathos, we're full of logos. But it's the logos one that enabled us to be the apex predator, because we have the ability to reason. Now, again, with the emotions, with the logic, the logos, we all have different skill levels of logos. You know, from your own circle of friends. There's the logical ones, and there are the ones that are less logical, let's say. People who are very good at reasoning and coming up with a pattern, versus people who are not as good as that stuff. But we all have a base level, right? Development of our prefrontal cortex is what enabled us to be reasoning and logical, so that when we're in, 10, 20,000 years ago, and we're in the woods, and we hear something coming up behind us, right? We have a fight-or-flight instinct, which is our body on autopilot saying either get ready to run or get ready to fight. Okay? Things happen when the fight-or-flight instinct hits. Our blood pressure goes up, right? Our skin gets a little warmer as our muscles form a little bit to prepare us to fight. Okay? But what makes us different